Well, welcome everyone to another episode of Common Sense in an Uncommon World, and back here with Larry Venus. Larry, how have you been? How's your vacation been? I know you just got
It
back
was,
from a nice trip.
yep, we went on a Caribbean cruise on Royal Caribbean, and we had a lot of fun. A lot of
Well,
fun. I guess the only downside is this time of year, um, the red seaweed is pretty prevalent along the ocean, along the beaches.
yeah,
So, but we really had a great experience.
well, that's fantastic. And look, I know you came back home to quite a bit of craziness, which is kind of some of the areas we're going to talk about today. Some of the areas we're going to look at today to talk about is been obviously the Los Angeles protests, the riots, and the looting, plus the National Guard. We've got California U.S. Senator Alex Padilla gets handcuffed and is now gone, doing his tour, talking about getting handcuffed, obviously discussing immigration. The California state budget, they just made the deadline, but obviously all the budget talks are happening for this next coming weeks. In addition, we've got the California state legislators are calling for higher taxes on healthcare. And you've got, and last but not least, you got Senator Shannon Grove and Democratic Assemblywoman work together on a human trafficking bill. But let's kind of start it off with what's happened in Los Angeles. I know that as of today, which is June 17th, we had Karen Bass indicate that they are no longer going to have a curfew. They've now lifted the curfew. But I mean, what a week it's been over in not just Southern California, but across the nation with the No Kings protest, uh, the curfews, the National Guard, and everything else in Los Angeles. What do you make of this?
I'm thankful that Saturday went relatively smoothly throughout most cities. Um, People have a right to protest, and at least on that day, um, everyone used it appears at least everyone used that right properly, unlike what had happened earlier in the week in Los Angeles, where things started to get out of control.
Yeah,
So,
and it did get out of control. I mean, there you've got you know, and it's been hard to explain to folks, friends that I've got in other states as to what is happening in California. It's like, why do you guys need the National Guard? What is going on there? And one thing I've tried to explain to them is we have a certain set of laws here in California. We have a sanctuary state and we have sanctuary cities. And in some of these locales or locations, law enforcement is barred from helping law enforcement. They're prevented from engaging any type of immigration enforcement. We also have certain areas where law enforcement isn't even allowed to hand over or let ICE know that some criminal is about to be done with their jail time or their prison time and hand them over. And so what happens is there isn't that level of coordination. There is not just that what happens in the court, what happens in the prisons, in the jails, but also when they're out in the communities, they're not allowed to go and help out or provide assistance to law enforcement. And so you've got a situation which I know has gotten kind of hairy in California, where ICE agents are out there trying to do what they're being tasked to do, and you've got a mob that comes around them, and who's there to protect them?
right. I mean, I kind of take this from everything is political
Yeah,
worldview. So, um, uh, things got out of control on Thursday, was it, or Wednesday, whenever the protest started.
yeah,
And just from a pure political point of view, President Trump was waiting for his moment to send in the National Guard, and California gave him a reason. And now we're in the courts deciding whether or not he has that authority without the governor's permission or not. And I suspect the Supreme Court will have to make a decision. I think the Court of Appeals is hearing it today, a three-panel court. So just taking it from that lens, um, you know, um, uh, there was a political opportunity. California gave it to him, and he took advantage of it. And uh, like I said about Saturday, if people protest peacefully, they have an absolute right. if the protesters were really smart, they'd all be carrying the American flag.
It's,
Because really, we're not talking about what California thinks. We're talking about the rest of the nation. And when middle America, the average Joe, um, sees non-American flags being flown or split flags that are transitioned from the American flag to the Mexican or whatever country they may be doing, that does not get a good reaction from the public. So, from a political point of view, it's a loss for what the point they're trying to make. Um, so, it's unfortunate on all sides. Agents have a job to do. Um, I said it when Obama was president. Um, Obama promised Obamacare and he delivered it. Trump promised deportations, everyone who's here illegally, and he's doing exactly that. Um, there are consequences to everything, and we as American people have to weigh if that's exactly what we want. Everyone um, who's here illegally sent home. And
you know,
it
yeah,
looks like the president has, at least on social media, adjusted his thinking.
yeah. It's interesting because my parents live in Los Angeles, and my dad, even though he's been retired, he still kind of goes into does part time work and stuff, and so we had this conversation is because he has to go through downtown in order to get to work.
Right.
What happens if someone surrounds his vehicle? What does he do? Does he remain in it? Does he try to get out? Or does he just drive through? And it's a kind of a sad thing to have this conversation because the truth is, if in California, if he drives through fearing, does this 75-year-old guy now go end up in jail for that? And so that is kind of one of the fears that we had, and one of the conversations we had with the family. What exactly does he do? I know you've got a different situation that is happening in other parts of the country, where the idea is that, hey, if you get a mob around you, you can drive right through them. And so, I mean, these are some of the areas, some of the other areas that, as Larry was mentioning, you had your protest, but at the same time, you had individuals that were looting. You've got individuals that were attacking police officers, throwing things at them. I mean, videos there of the Waymo cars being set on fire, but you also had some of these protesters that were throwing over, the bridge, these scooters onto some of the squad cars. And so you had this havoc, and I think Larry is right. You had the President Trump, who ended up doing well, obviously looking at this particular situation and saying, see, this is why we need to go out there and create some law and order. But I think the other person who probably ended up winning in this thing was also Gavin Newsom. I think now he's got an issue where he can go out there and contrast between himself and President Trump, and at the same time contrast between him and all the other people who may be vying to run for president. Here you've got an individual who went out, created his videos, went out, created his stump, looked as though he was. You got Gavin Newsom looked like he was out there pushing back on Trump, and I think he ended up winning in this particular situation too. He got. I mean, granted, I know he goes on quite a bit of national TV, but being the anti-Trump for immigrants, going out there doing his stump speeches. Like I said, I think he benefited from this whole thing. He was able to contrast, and the thing is, if you've got about 6 or 7 people that are running for president on the Democratic side, he's going to need a chunk of those votes. And I think with this particular issue on the Democratic side, and this is primary voters, not looking into the general election, I think he's getting his chunk of voters there.
He's clearly running for president. There's no doubt.
Yeah.
And um, I mean, it's a long time between now and then. I mean, truthfully, the president has just started his term. Um, we knew from the first term that it was going to be controversial, to say the least, and
Yeah.
people would be engaged. That's happening. So it's going to be an interesting 4 years. And right now, Gavin Newsom has put himself at the forefront of who's going to be the lead candidate in 2028. But he also has a record here that is not so pretty. We'll just say it that. I mean, um,
I was
homelessness
just
is still out of control.
yeah,
We were together in 2020 when we took pictures,
yeah.
and we could go to those same exact locations now, Hector, and the homeless situation would be exactly the same. If you drive downtown, there's homeless everywhere. Um, uh, and
And it was
then this,
interesting. There were videos of downtown Los Angeles of where protesters are marching, and they're peaceful, right? Peacefully marching down the street, walking over some of these homeless people
right, right.
that they're on the street. It's crazy. I was just at an event today at noontime for Dan Walters. It's 50 years of reporting, right? Of being a journalist, and they asked him the question about the different governors that he's covered because I think he counted, if you count people who ran twice, like Jerry Brown, right? That'll count twice. You've got Gavin Newsom, you've got Arnold Schwarzenegger. One of the things he mentioned in his discussion is that California, and just like Larry was mentioning, yeah, California, you've got Gavin, who is kind of on the forefront of, or the leader right now of maybe running for president, but you have a individual who goes out there and says we are the fourth largest economy in the world, but at the same time we have some of the highest poverty rates, we have some of the worst business climate in the nation, and at the same time California, as Larry was mentioning, we've got the worst homeless situation. So when you start adding that together, the homeless, and the other thing that Dan Walters mentioned, he says, we have some of the worst, grade scores. So we may be the fourth largest economy, but the thing is, for so many of these individuals, is stop touting us being the fourth largest economy and start working on the problems that matter to Californians. And I think that becomes his Achilles heel when he decides to run for president. Now, there is two levels to this, right? You've got your primary, and then you have your general election. And so, should he be able to get himself out of the primary, then all this becomes a kind of a heavy load on him.
Uh, yes. I mean, he's running as a Democrat right now, and he'll have to run on his record if he is indeed the candidate, in 2028. And
Yeah,
um, while I, uh, I think he'll have a difficult time running on that record.
yeah,
But I will say this: um, Gavin Newsom is a very convincing individual, and despite what we see, he will try to make us think we saw something else. And he's very, very, very good at that. And no one should downplay his ability to um, try to convince people that California doesn't have a problem with education, doesn't have a problem with homelessness, doesn't have a problem balancing its budget, doesn't have a problem with crime. All of that exists, but he'll use a sleight of hand to try to convince Middle America that he's someone else.
yeah, yeah. Kind of going on to the next topic, which is Alex Padilla getting handcuffed. United States senator getting handcuffed. We saw the video. From what we saw, there was a press conference with Kristi Noem, who I think Larry, I just mentioned a little while ago over to you before we got on that. Like I said, we're recording here on June 17th. She was rushed to the hospital. There have been no reports as to why she was rushed to the hospital. We'll probably be getting that after we're done with this podcast, and we'll provide more information later. But she was holding a press conference. Someone comes is in the bill is in that room, starts kind of looks like kind of going toward her. You've got Secret Service kind of preventing him from it, and lo and behold, we find out that it's Alex Padilla. He gets pushed out of the room, gets handcuffed, and voila, then holds a press conference outside. It's a I think he came out the winner on this one too for his particular base too.
I think, yes. Look, um, it was uh, once they pushed him to the floor, he won.
Yeah,
Once they put the handcuffs on him, he won. Um, People can try to explain that away, but as we talked last week, we remember a time when a state senator from the Republican Party got pulled off the Senate floor for not stopping to speak, and she got a lot of national attention for a long period of time because of that incident. And it in my view, um, he's now the national figure on immigration. With
yeah,
his, if they can treat me that way, how do you think they're going to how are they going to treat hotel workers and farm workers and anyone else who might be approached? So they made a mistake, escorting him out of the room, fine, but once they forced him to the ground, they lost the political PR battle because all of this, every again, this is politics. Everything is political, and so just from a clip perspective, he wins.
yeah, yeah.
Period. And he will now be that guy they go to for a comment when it comes to immigration.
And he has been. He was on the U.S. Senate floor today, um, asking for people asking for an investigation as to why he was handcuffed. I mean, look, to his credit. I mean, once again, we're under this idea that everything is politics. To his credit, he had a staffer there. When you see the full video and he's and Alex, Senator Alex Padilla is taken down the hallway, and he's on his knees and then on the floor. You've got an agent who says, "Hey, you can't be recording in this hallway. The FBI office, you can't be recording." He goes, "No, I have to. That's my boss. I have to keep on recording." And so, later on, CNN comes out and says that every one of the news outlets got a copy of that whole video from the staffer,
Right.
from Alex Padilla's staffer, because they were in there to record it. You know, Obviously, looking at what CNN and all the other news outlets have been saying is it looks staged. It looked like he came in there with a purpose to try to make headlines. Someone was recording it, but you're right. The minute he identified himself after they were already pushing him out, they put him on the ground and put a handcuff. They could have just kept him, pushed him out of the ground, and then by that time, you could see on his shirt that he said Senator, Senator
Right.
Padilla. By that time, I think they could have used some other method and said, okay, hey, we're pushing you out. You can't do this. Close the doors. Press conference. I mean, from my understanding, the press conference just continued on. She didn't miss a beat. She just continued on, didn't look that way, and just continued on. So, but he's been using this issue, and he's going to continue to use this issue, and it becomes a win over for him and his constituents.
So here's my hope. My hope is that um, this results in some sort of um, true immigration reform, because that's what we need. Um, uh, President Trump backtracked on Friday when he said, you know, we need to back off farm workers and hotel and people in the service industry because they're good people. They've been here a long time and they don't deserve just to be thrown out of the country. He's right. But he ran on a platform that said anyone here illegally, it needs to be rounded up and sent back to their country of origin. So now we have a decision to make. Do we want to eat? Do we want our rooms cleaned? Um, and are we serious about all sides, Republicans and Democrats, coming to the table and creating some immigration reform that deals with the criminal element
Right.
and allows people who are literally here um, trying to feed their families to continue working in the fields working in the hotels, working in the restaurants.
Yeah,
We
and
as
for me,
American people have a choice of what we want.
see, and for me, I look at it in two areas. Yes, coming into the United States is a crime, but I also look at it as you've got, and the numbers can vary. You've got 400 to 600,000 people that they've been able to identify who have committed serious crimes, who are accused of child molestation, who are accused of murder, who are accused of drug running, who are accused of human trafficking, prostitution, and a variety of other crimes. I say go after them first. Pull them
Yeah.
out. Be done with this whole thing. And and the thing is, like, you're going to get I mean, I think it's part of it. I think this immigration situation that ICE is doing is a interesting, and I hate to use the word, but a setup. In the sense of, I think they are going after some of those people. I think they, as they're arresting those, there's other people who are collateral damage. But I think ICE and the Department of Homeland Security is able to say, we went into this store in the fashion district in Los Angeles or in this area, and that is because they were running money for the cartel. Yes, in that operation, we arrested 3 individuals who are linked in it, but we arrested 10 people who are all undocumented who were in part of this operation. I think they go into a home to go get a person accused of murder, but maybe in the home there's 2 other people who aren't accused of the murder, but they get them all together. So when you've got the protests, you've got the mob, you've got the people looting, they said, why is everyone looting? Why is everyone upset? Here's a person we went and arrested and is accused of murder, accused of child molestation, and accused of this. And so it makes it more difficult for the mayor. It makes it more difficult for the governor to have a leg to stand on, because the response is, so do you want us to not go and arrest this murderer or child molester or this human trafficker? Which one is it?
Right. No one, I think, I'm just going to speak for myself. Couldn't agree with you more. But coming from an everything is politics, every time there's a video of an American citizen being detained because he's Hispanic, and it's put up on social media platforms, every time we see an ICE agent running through a farm field, chasing down a farm worker, um, you know, um, that is not a good look,
Yeah.
and that is not going to win the day, and that is not going to get the hardened criminal um, that you're talking about um, getting caught and leaving this country. We just have hard decisions. Like I said about homelessness, the answer is not easy and it doesn't look pretty. But if we're serious about, um, if we're serious about it, we have a decision to make. Do we want to round up 3,000 people a day as some of Trump's administration has suggested? Because if you want just quotas, there are a lot of people who are here working hard, undocumented, that can meet you those quotas. Or are you really interested in the criminals? Then the people who are a threat to America
Yeah.
and to the citizens. Um, those are hard decisions. And and by the way, you have to be more precise then. You can't just ask anyone for their ID. You have to know who they are. And we have a lot of technology today. We can be more precise in who we're picking up, I believe, if we're really just interested in um, the criminal element. My fear is um, there's a bit of a quota working, and agents might be trying to meet a quota,
Well,
and
and I
I
think, yeah, and I think part of it
and
is going
they're
to
under
be,
pressure. Look, I make
yeah.
no bones that puts pressure on them. If they think, what do you do, Hector, when you know that person's illegal? What do you do if you're a nice agent, but he just happened to be coming out of a restaurant, or or a farm, um, or a hotel? What do we do?
Well, there's a situation, and I'll make sure I put it into the comments, or maybe I'll embed it into the video in a little bit. Is There was a situation in Los Angeles today where the sheriffs went out and tried to go find a someone's, in a murder case, and the people in the community came out. They thought it was ICE, and it's KTLA News down in Southern California. They said, like, no, this was we are the LA County sheriffs. We're trying to go find this individual on a murder investigation, and you had a mob of people coming out there. And the most interesting thing is you had a couple of people who were there. It's like, no, we know for sure that this was ICE, that this was part of an immigration. It's like, now you've got, Susie, who works over at the tire shop, or Joe, who works over at accounting, all of a sudden knowing what law enforcement's going to do. And the problem is now you've endangered law enforcement to go carry out their regular duties, which aren't even connected over with immigration. And the fear is that, and then you've got, to add more to this particular story, then you had yesterday, you had a state senator, or I think one or two state senators, who introduced legislation that would prevent any law enforcement, whether it's, and I know they won't be able to get through the federal, but federal, state, or local, from being able to cover their face if they're dealing with anything related to immigration, which now puts these individuals in greater risk, because when they are there protecting, which, obviously you've got a group of people, everyone with their phones out, the fear is that they're going to get their families threatened. They're going to get their kids, their wives, their husbands, and themselves threatened for doing their job.
Right. But it becomes a bad look when they're with their face masks on and they're surrounding an American citizen, asking him for his ID. And that's why I'm saying we have to be more precise in what we're doing, because ultimately this is a game of politics. And do we want to solve the problem, or do we want to? Do we really want to infringe on the rights of actual Americans because they're brown? Do we really want that? And we're at a crossroads now where at least some people are asking that question. And social media becomes an immediate world. It gets posted immediately. Everything, for whatever reason, is filmed. They're not going to get away with it. And here we are. Again, I'd ask you, an ICE agent pulls up on a farm. What does he do?
No, I get it.
That,
I know it's tough on the employer. It's the community itself. Look, if we're gonna start unmasking people, and with this particular legislation by Senator Scott Wiener out of San Francisco on law enforcement not being able to cover their face, I want other protesters too to not be able to cover their face either.
I agree.
Because if they're out there attacking police officers, attacking their horses, attacking anything else, or throwing scooters off the bridge and onto squad cars, I want law enforcement to find out who they are and arrest them,
Right.
and have there be some consequences. But Larry, I don't think this particular situation is going to get any better soon. And you brought something up which is homelessness, and yes, you and I, several years ago, we went out and we took pictures. We went out and spoke to some homeless people, to find out their situation, how they got there, and so forth. And I think that particular area is just going to get itself worse. I think the area with law enforcement is going to get worse. First responders, because, and this kind of touches into our next subject, which is the state budget. We just had the deadline for the state budget, which was June 15th.
Right.
Now, what they do is they pass, I don't know how to explain this, a shell
It's a
of a
fake budget.
a
It's a
fake
fake
budget,
budget.
so that the legislators can continue to get paid. Now, they have to work on the budget until July 1st, because that's the start of the new fiscal year. But there's a couple other things that they'll work on for the later of the year. But the thing is that we're spending a lot more money than we're bringing in. And we have been bringing in the last 10, 12 years quite a bit of money. We went through $100 billion surplus into a $60 billion surplus in deficit, sorry. And this particular year, we're into another $20 billion deficit. And we already started to see that there's cuts coming in certain programs, certain cuts coming over to homeless programs, that the cities and counties have been asking for. So now they'll have less money to deal with that. In addition, you've got certain cuts over to healthcare that is coming to individuals. Now, here's where the fight, and it ties in a little bit to immigration, comes in. Right now, we are dealing with a situation in the legislature that's providing healthcare to undocumented people at a cost of about $11.2 billion a year. Um, and so, in the program, you had Gavin Newsom who said, "Okay, we're going to continue to provide it, but in 2027, they're going to have to pay $100 into the system." The legislature comes in and says, "No, we're going to only charge them $30 a month coming into the system. And in addition, you can continue to expand your roles." And so there's a lot into this particular area where they are leaning into heavy borrowing, into pushing back, borrowing from pages, into tapping into the rainy day fund. And as of right now, we're kind of upside down in the state budget.
Right. Because only one side does the talking. There is no negotiating. It's
Yeah.
only Democrats negotiating with Democrats. And if you really want balance, um, uh, everyone has to be involved in the process. And that doesn't happen because they don't need Republican votes. It's just that simple. In a day when they needed Republican votes, they would have to compromise. Well,
Yeah.
that word doesn't exist. The people of California voted to not pay them if they didn't pass a budget by June 15th. Um, they're such, I'll just use the word, they're such shysters that they said, oh, okay, we got to work around that. We'll just pass a fake budget and then negotiate the next 2 weeks with the governor um, because we're under pressure now to get something passed. And that getting something passed is going to not include funding for Prop 36, which is what
Yeah.
the people voted for. For people that don't know, Prop 36 is the one that uh, deals with the criminal element in California and lessens the standard to put them in jail. He's put zero funding towards that. He's virtually eliminated homeless funding, which means local communities are going to feel a lot more stress
Yeah.
in the programs. Um, and yet, third graders still can't read at a third grade level.
Yeah.
And, there's no win out of this. It's only loss. If at least our kids were getting educated, we could point to that as a success story. But we're spending all this money on education and our kids aren't getting educated. And we can't, um, there was a hole with COVID, but if we're all really being truthful, kids weren't reading at a third grade level before COVID, and they're still not reading at a third grade level. Um, Someone shared the new standards, the San Francisco standard, put out new standards that the San Francisco and San Leandro Unified School Districts were going to implement, which basically um, passed everybody. It made all C's A's, made all F C's, and changes the passing score. You can get as low as a 20% and get a D in a class. That serves no one. That kid will not succeed in life if he's scoring 20%. That means you're assured to pass. Because if you have a multiple choice test, you're going to get 25% of them right just by blindly circling an answer. Um, but that's what we're doing in California. We're spending all this money without any results. Is homelessness better? No. Is crime better? No. Um, uh,
You got gas prices, you've got energy, you got electricity prices,
right.
you've got the cost of
Look,
living, you've got housing. Yeah.
I'm I think we need to as humanity we need to transform into something that doesn't use as much oil. That hasn't happened yet. So we need oil. Whether I like it or not, we need it. And it would seem to me that excuse me, you're best served if you're able to control the oil that's being pumped, instead of depending on other countries that are giving you dirty oil. And you put a picture up yesterday of an oil tanker that crashed and burnt. That's a that's a disaster for the environment. That does no good. That wouldn't have happened if we were pumping our oil here. We have a crisis going on in Iran that is going to impact oil prices, probably more in the Midwest than in California, according to the gas buddy expert. But nonetheless, if we were pumping our oil in California, it wouldn't matter what's going on. Um, we could be putting whatever regulations are needed in order to make sure this oil we're pumping in California is clean. But instead, we put so many regulations and such exuberant prices that your friends in the oil industry just say, "We're done. We're gonna produce we're gonna close." So
Yeah.
how many oil refineries are there now in California, Hector? Six?
There's about eight to nine. Well, nine, eight, and two more. They'll be down to six. Yeah.
How many were there?
And we used to have 30. Yeah. About
Right.
20 some years ago. Yeah.
I just got back from Houston and Galveston. The crews left out of Galveston. On the Uber ride, I noticed gas was like 2.40 a gallon. And I asked the Uber driver, I said, "Wow, that's a pretty good price you pay." He goes, "Oh, we just go to Costco, it's 2.25." So in Houston and Galveston, gas is $2.25. But by the way, an Uber ride is a lot cheaper in Texas. Like, give you an example, it costs for a 45-minute ride from the Houston airport to Galveston, it's $40. And that's because gas is 2.25.
Yeah.
You're not going to get a 45-minute drive for $40 in California.
Yeah.
But
And everything else that it touches. You know.
right.
You
But
know.
here we
It's
are.
your food, everything else that needs to get transported one place to another. There's an impact, and the crazy part is now in the legislature there is a discussion because in the Democratic Party they had this little poll that they were showing around on increasing taxes on corporations. Now, granted, I know corporate. I mean, the talking points is we're going to increase it on the wealthy. We're increasing it on these big corporations, and they've tried to mention Walmart and all these other companies. But you got corporations that are one person teams, that are two-person teams, that are just struggling to get by because of the way regulations, everything else is booked in here. And so, that's part of the thing is the solution isn't okay. We're going to kind of control what we've got, and this is one of the things is especially with government is or people get into office is everyone comes up with all these grandiose ideas of what they want to do, but do less. Focus on the things that matter. Try to make changes there. Things that matter like education. Okay, where are standards? We're pumping in so much money into this educational system, but what are we getting out of it? Is too much money going to the administration and not enough money going into the classroom itself, into teachers? Do we need to pay them more? Are we paying them enough? What kind of learning instructions? Do we need to make this a profession where we give more resources for, I don't know, teacher aides or whatever that may be? I don't have the answer to this, but whatever that thing is, someone has already found that solution and they just need to figure out a way to implement it. Are the teachers unions too powerful? Do we need to is that part of the problem? Is is
Yes.
is what we're
Yes.
is what we're teaching them? I mean, and you've been in the legislature, Larry. Every single year, how many different bills did you have to come across that you had to go and read or look at that said we're going to teach them about this history, about this history, about this group, about that group, about this group? At the end of the days, why aren't we just teaching them to read, to write, and to be able to get on to the next grade and pass some of these exams?
Right. The sad part is that they can implement all the auxiliary extra programs they want to implement, um, so they can have their feel good agenda. But at the end of the day, the kids can't read the history that's being put forward. That's just the truth. Um, they can't do math. That's just the truth, and it's broken. Tom McClintock in like 2004, he did a budget, a simple budget. To your point of there's too much administration, and this is in 2004. He paid like every teacher $150,000, and he just based it on what the kid got as a member of a public education. At that time, it was something like $12,000. And if there were 25 kids, and he came up with a total, and then he started, everyone got their own personal computer. Everyone got so they'd get physical education. Everyone got a gym membership. They paid professor level salaries, and they still had money left out of that budget. The money's going somewhere, and it's not getting to the classroom, and kids aren't being taught. You know, your kids are being taught because you're going to make sure they know, and if they don't, you're going to do whatever it takes for them to succeed in life. But the biggest losers are poor people, because we're willing just to pass them on without any real standards. um, they get left behind, and it's a shame.
And it really hurts, yeah, lower income individuals, especially those working households, where you've got both parents are out there working, and I'm sorry, is, for a lot of folks, especially when you live in a situation where you have to have that job and a half or the two jobs just to be able to pay the rent or just to be able to survive in this particular state. The time spent with the kid to be able to say, okay, are you reading, are you doing this, let me help you with your homework. I'm blessed with Amy, who is able to be at home and looks after the homework. I do, when I get home, I do my reading. I'll sit there with the little one, the 9-year old. She just turned 9 this Sunday, with the 9-year old. And we sit there and read, and we're there for half an hour. Okay, we'll take a little break and come back for another half an hour. And so there are those things we do. But you're right, it is
I
a
mean,
difficult
you
situation.
probably know this, Hector, because you have a 9-year old. I have an 8-year old granddaughter that turned 8 last week. They don't teach cursive anymore.
No. Yeah,
Like, I was kind of stunned. They don't teach cursive. They don't really teach you how to read a watch.
yeah,
Um, Granted, things are different. Um, but if you're not using that time to teach kids how to write instead of print, well, that time could be used teaching them other things, uh, like math and reading.
yeah.
But our kids are failing, and it's all of our fault because we all pay the price eventually if they're not well educated. We all pay that price because they end up in places that we're going to end up paying for anyway. And we have the money now to make sure that doesn't happen. And we have tough decisions to make that no one's willing to make. And that means maybe longer school years, maybe more of a focus on making sure they know the basics of reading, writing, and arithmetic. Look, I'm very supportive of many of these programs that are talked about, but I'd stop being supportive when I realize our children can't read and write. It really doesn't matter about anything else. Once I just say to all these other groups, you want to bring this into the classroom? Well, prove me wrong by getting these kids to learn to read and write and do arithmetic. Then we can have a discussion. Then you can say, up, these kids are at an eighth grade level, are at a ninth grade level. Now we want to introduce this program into the school system. I'm confident enough to say, okay, but it's going to take a long time before our kids get to that level.
And you're right. It's an interesting dynamic. And like I said, with this budget, we'll find out, because we'll find out what the priorities become in the next couple of weeks. what they are going to fund, if there are going to be some cuts, or if it's just going to be more borrowing and pushing it down the other, down the road, which ultimately it's going to affect whoever becomes the next governor of California, the next next members of the legislature. But there's this so far this legislative season. It's been, I will give credit to Republicans in this sense, is they have been taking kind of a little different strategy here in California. Right now, they've got such low numbers in the state senate and the assembly that, as Larry mentioned, Democrats don't need a single one of their votes. They don't need to consult with them about the budget. They really don't need to consult with them on any piece of legislation because they just can just pass it. And so, into kind of our last subject is, about a month and a half ago, you've got California State Senator Shannon Grove, and you've got an Assemblywoman, Democratic Assemblywoman, who ended up kind of working together to try to pass legislation that dealt with human trafficking. And Larry, this particular piece of legislation, I know you remember it. The Democratic legislator, her name is Maggie Krill from
Right.
Sacramento, who was a prosecutor, spent her career as a prosecutor going after individuals who were doing human trafficking, sex exploitation of minors, and that's what the legislation dealt with: is should it be a felony for the Johns who go out and solicit minors, and mind you, we got to qualify minors here, people under 17 years of age, for sex. Because previously, State Senator Shannon Grove tried to get that legislation passed and it was defeated. And so the only thing she was able to get is minors who are under the age of 15. And that passed, I want to say, about a year or two ago. And so now she said, I'll be back with another piece of legislation. And true to her word, she came back. And this time really worked with the Democrat and gave the bill to the Democrat and said, hey, you run with it. And it created a firestorm in Sacramento. It created a firestorm where the Assemblywoman Crow had her name removed from the legislation. Was being there was a lot of pushback from within the own Democratic Party. It kind of split them up because you had one camp that said yes, make it a felony. You had another camp that said no, we don't need to put more people in jail. Our prisons were overcrowded. We can't have more people there. And so it just became this craziness. And I mean, I'm looking at one of the articles here, and it says, we need to say loud and clear that if you're under 18, a child, a minor, that a person buying that person should be charged with a felony. And that was the Assemblywoman, Democratic Assemblywoman Maggie Krill, as she stated on the floor. And to end this quote, she said, it's plain and simple: sex without consent, that's rape. And
And,
that's the fight that they had.
right. And it's a righteous fight, but it's a fight that should never have had to take place because, in truth, this should have been taken about 5 minutes of the legislature's time to say, of course it's a crime, and pass it and move on. It should have been a crime for 150 years. Um, but, um, the guy who wants to be president actually had to step in, and I'm talking about Governor Newsom, and press Democrats to support a bill that says you can't traffic kids for sex under 18. It's like that's the bizarro world we live in California, and that's why um, the rest of the country looks at us like we're kooks.
Yeah.
Because God bless Senator Grove for making this a priority, but it should have never had to be a priority. This should have been something that just passed unanimously when they realized the flaw in the law and moved on. But last year or 2 years ago, it was kind of going that way, and then a Democrat voted no and gave her all this attention. It's become she's become a national figure. Local news stations have won national journalism awards for the reporting of this subject on something that is so simple that it's beyond common sense. Of course, should be illegal. Of course, they should go to jail. But everything being political, um, Senator Grove is a national figure as a result of it, and will be the person, the go-to person when that subject is ever discussed at a state or national level.
Yeah, and the interesting part with this particular, the way it kind of came through in, and this is where I give the credit, is they made sure that they had their entire communications apparatus ready to go. They knew what the outcome was going to be. They knew that the Democrats were going to say no. And once they said no, and you had, I mean, you even had the Assembly and the Senate leader going out and giving writing a statement saying, we are going to take this particular piece of legislation and go and study it. We're going to learn more about it. And so once all those things, they knew, the Republicans knew what was going to happen, where this thing wasn't going to be moved through. It was going to be delayed one way or another. And they were ready to pounce. And they're ready to pounce on social media, on television, in print, radio. They got local news, they got national news, and once that pressure became too big, and they got going to old school here, the soccer moms to go out there and start saying, "What the hell are you doing?" And Democrats to go out there, Democratic voters say, "Okay, this is just beyond absurd."
Right.
And once those calls started coming in, that pressure, then their hands were tied, and they said, "Okay, we've already removed the Democratic Assemblywoman Crow from the legislation, and we'll give it to someone else, and we'll move it through the committee. We'll get it out of this house, and now it goes into the other house, which I believe it's going into the state Senate now, for them to have this debate, and we'll see what it ends up there and what the debate's going to be there, because one of the people who has constantly voted against this, as you mentioned him, you suggested to it, is Senator Scott Wiener. The other one was the state senator, and she just retired from Berkeley. I think she just got a brand new appointment. Do you remember that?
Jackson.
No, she was just a state senator. Let's see here. I'll look her up. State senator from some Berkeley. She, like I said, Nancy Skinner.
Yes.
Nancy Skinner. Yeah. So Nancy Skinner was the other big no vote that would always come into this particular legislation, and she has now been appointed. In January, she was appointed by Governor Gavin Newsom to the California Energy Commission. That is
I'm
where
sure that pays. I'm sure that pays the 150, 175,000. So,
yeah,
yeah. But again, I suspect the bill will pass. I suspect the governor will have a signing session because he wants to be president, and this is an issue that can uh, help him use that issue to try to trick us into all the other stuff that's going on in California that he doesn't want us to see.
yeah, yeah,
So that's where I say he's very good at communicating and making you think up is down and right is left. But on this bill, I suspect it'll pass and get signed, and Senator Grove deserves all the recognition she's getting, the Assemblywoman too. But in reality, this should have been a consent and move bill because, of course, it should be illegal to have sex with a minor.
yeah.
End of story.
Yep. Or as Gavin Newsom likes to say, what is a stop? Full stop.
Full
Period.
stop. Period. Yep.
Yeah.
And that's what it should be.
Yeah.
So we'll see. It should be an interesting summer.